On this video, I'll be cutting a bald fade to curly hair on top. In the first step, I'll use my 3.5 blade to cut up to the occipital bone in the back. I will start in the center and then alternate to both sides in an attempt to make it symmetrical on each side. At the top of each stroke, I will wedge the clipper off of the head in a letter C motion to create soft guidelines into the higher sections. When the head curves away from me, I'll use the curve of the head as the C shape, and the clipper follow through will be straight up. I like to make the shape of the sides and the back before cutting in the fade, so I'll cut up from the sections that I cut with the 3.5 clipper. I am careful to keep the spine of the comb closer to the head and the teeth away from the head. All the motions are just continuations that I made with the 3.5. My comb continues to move up as I cut. I can cross-check as I cut by continuing to change the angle of the comb. I will go to my 1.5 clipper blade for the next step. The technique I'm using is called skip guard. That's because I went from the 3.5 to the 1.5 and I skipped the number 2 blade so that I can still see my soft guidelines that I create with the C motion. I space the guidelines about halfway between the hairline and the 3.5 guideline. For some of this step, I use the corners of the 1.5 a little higher into the dark spots created by dips and creases in the scalp. You'll notice that some spots will look faded from certain angles and not faded from other angles. It is tempting to raise the fade above the dips in the scalp, but because I'm trying to maintain the shape of the cut, I will not push the 1.5 too high. Before I continue the fade, I will line up beneath the temples. Doing this before the fade makes it easier for me to visualize the points for my guidelines. In this step, I'll be using my adjustable clipper blade with the blade completely closed. When the blade is open, it is close to a number 1, and when it is completely closed, it's a 000 length. This will be the only guideline that's a blunt line. I make this line halfway between the natural hairline and the 1.5 guideline. Now I'll go to the first blade that I skipped, which is the number 2, to blend in between the 1.5 and the 3.5 guidelines. I clip with the number 2 almost up to the 3.5 guideline. I'll continue using the C motion with the number 2 to make sure the transition from the 1.5 to the 3.5 is blended. The next step, I'll use the number 1 blade. When I get about halfway between the 000 and the 1.5, I will flick my wrist and again go with the C motion. In the next step, I'll use my number 1A blade to blend between the 1 and the 1.5. Most of the time when I'm blending during this step, I will just use the corners of the 1A. That will perforate the dark spots without cutting into the thinner spots. Now I'll go back to my adjustable blade clippers to blend between the 000 and the number 1. If you're inexperienced in fading, I advise that you start with the blade completely open, which is almost a number 1 blade length. From there, you will push the clippers up to almost the point where you left off with the number 1. You'll continue this step around the head. Then you'll close the blade a little bit closer and fade up a little bit lower, and repeat that step over and over until the line is completely blended out. You'll notice in this step, I will again turn the clipper to its side and use just the corner of the blade to go a little bit higher to blend out darker spots that are higher up in the fade. I fine-tune the fade without changing the shape of the cut by using a small taper comb and my adjustable blade clippers with the blade closed. I change the angle of the comb and remain careful to not raise any guidelines while I'm clipping. The model in this video is my son. He has always had a tremendous amount of hair. I gave him his first haircut when he was only 3 months old. Since then, his hair has continued to get thicker in each strand and even more dense. Being curly and flat-celled, the hair grows out of the follicle and tends to lay flat to the scalp, making it appear even thicker. I love his hair, but those attributes make it challenging to blend because it goes from light to dark with very little change in length. In this step, I'll use my lining clipper that cuts down to a 5/0 length, making it very close to bald. The main focus in this step is to get as close to the fade without pushing into it. I continue to use the C motion in this step to make sure I don't create a harsh line between the liner and the 000. Now for the last part of the fade, and to make the bottom completely bald, I will use my foil shaver. If you want to make it go completely smooth, push into the skin with some pressure with both foils and go against the natural hair growth pattern. To blend between the completely smooth part and the 5/0 length that you made with your lining clipper, you can change direction and go down with the grain and use only one foil from the shaver. Any blending at this point can be accomplished by changing the angle that you swipe, as well as the pressure that you use and how many foils you're pushing down onto the scalp. To prepare the top to be cut, I'll spray it with water and pick out the tangles with a wide toothpick. This is basically just to make sure that when I cut using clipper over comb techniques, the comb will not have any difficulty moving through the hair. I will now continue cutting clipper over comb to transition from the faded portion of the cut into the top of the hair. I comb the hair down over the previously cut section to see which hair overlaps, and then I comb up and away from the scalp to cut the overlapping hair. I continually move the comb while I'm clipping. Then I comb the next section back down to see any overlapping hair, comb up and away from the scalp, and will cut the overlapping hair again. As I cut section to section, I start in the middle and go side to side using the previously cut sections as guides for the new sections. I continue to blend the back from ear to ear without any disconnection. As I cut, I will cross-check the transitional sections by changing my comb to a 90-degree angle to the floor, and I will clip any tags sticking out from the bulk of the hair. From the ear to the front hairline, there will be a disconnection that gradually becomes more pronounced towards the front. The disconnection will allow the curl to bounce back and allow the shape to remain square from the sides up to the top. I continue to cut from the sides to cross-check the back of the top and create new guides for the front of the top. I'll comb back towards myself to see the hair that's overlapping, and then comb in towards the center of the hair to cut any tags that are sticking out from the bulk of the hair. I'll finish the cut by cutting the front from various angles, and at this point it's more about the shape of the cut than cutting to any length. To style this look, I'll use Victory Crown Texture Spray. First, I will lightly mist the hair. The mist will reactivate any curl that has been pulled out while I was cutting clipper over comb. Once the hair is damp, I will spray the texture spray from about a foot away from the head onto the hair. I actually believe the best thing to do at this point is let the hair air dry and shape with your hands later. But when pressed for time or styling it in the shop, I like to use a blow dryer with a diffuser. First, I'll hold the blow dryer a fair amount away from the head to dry the hair. And I turn the power all the way down to the lowest setting and lower the heat a little bit and push the diffuser into the hair. The prongs in the diffuser can be used to move the hair without combing the curls out. While the diffuser is in the hair, I move it in small, gentle circles. Once the hair is dry, I will shape it with my fingers. Once the texture spray dries, it allows me to easily mold the hair into place and also keep the hair's natural curl. Thank you for watching. You can like and subscribe and watch more of my videos. I got a lot of tutorials, some crazy little funny videos, some basketball stuff, some old stuff. It's a one-stop shop.